In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a quilt-as-you-go mug rug using scrap fabrics and decorative stitches. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts. Now, you probably have lots of scrap fabrics around, just like I do. This project is a great way to use those up, make a really cute mug rug, and it's perfect for gift giving. So let's take a look at what we're going to make today. Here's my little quilted mug rug. And I've chosen some kind of Christmassy seasonal fabrics for it. But what's fun is that it uses up not only extra strips of fabric, scrap fabric that I have left over, in this case the white and the red you see here, but I also used crumb fabric. So those are really small pieces of fabric. If you don't know how to make crumb fabric, look up above or in the description below because I'll put a link to a video on how to do that. It's a great way to use up all those little bits of fabric that you have hanging around your studio. So in this particular case, I used green crumb fabric, and as I mentioned before, the white and red strips of fabric. So it used up just a bit of my excess scrap fabrics, but it gives a really fun look to the project. And then, of course, we're using Quilt As You Go, so the quilting is done by the time the project is done. I don't have to quilt it after adding all the fabrics. But I also use metallic thread and decorative stitches on this project. So it's a fun way to use the decorative stitches, which we don't often get to use, and it's also fun to use metallic thread. Yes, it is. And I'm going to talk about how to do that in just a moment. So here's my little project. It's a 5 by 7 inch. You can make it whatever size you want. The one thing that you need to make sure of is that when you are choosing fabric strips that they extend both sides. They're on a bit of an angle, so they may have to be a little longer than you think. So you always want to audition them first to make sure they're going to be long enough to create the mug rug. All right, let's talk about what we need to create this project. Well, the first thing you're going to need is fabric, right? And for my project that I'm working with today, because I'm going to recreate this, I want to work with some crumb fabrics and I want to switch up the color palette just a little bit. So I'm working with some red crumb fabric here. So I've got some pieces here and green strips and white strips. So kind of the opposite of what I was doing with my original sample, because why not, right? You also need a foundation to put your strip pieces on, and that is going to be your batting. So I cut the batting out to the unfinished size I want my project to be. So in this case, it's 5.5 inches by 7.5 inches. I also need a backing, and the backing is cut the same size, 5.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Now, for my project today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use my batting as my foundation for my Quilt As You Go project. I will add my backing afterwards. And the reason I do this is because I don't like to add binding. Okay, that's the real truth, okay? I'm going to use the pillowcase method to put this together at the end because it's just a small project and I can do that. I really don't want to have to spend time binding something this small. So that's why I'm only using the batting and not the batting and backing for the Quilt As You Go method, right? Good, so I got that. Now I need to have some thread. I've got my machine set up with my regular piecing thread. We're going to use that to piece the strips as we go along, but I also wanted to add those decorative stitches and I want to use metallic thread. So I need metallic thread. So in the project that I previously did, I used the gold. For the red, I'm going to be using the silver, okay, on the red and the green and the white. All right. Now, when I'm working with metallic threads, I need to use the appropriate needle. And you can either use a metallic needle, I've got a Schmetz here, that's a 9014, or you can even use a top stitch needle in the 9014. So I actually have a Janome top stitch needle in my Janome M7 that I'm using for this project. So it's going to work well for not only the piecing thread. I'm cheating a little bit by using a top stitch rather than kind of the regular needle I would usually use in there, but it works fine for the piecing. I don't want to have to change my needle all the time. As it is, I'm going to have to change my thread when I go to do the decorative stitches with the metallic thread. I don't necessarily have to do that. I could have just continued using the same thread I used for piecing, but I want the metallic, so we're changing thread. Okay, if I remember. Okay, let's hope I remember. There's a few things I have to remember. All right, so these are the notions I need. Scissors or rotary cutter will be helpful, and eventually I'm going to need either a point turner or a that purple thing is what I like to use to push out the corners in my finished mug rug when I'm using the pillowcase technique, but we'll get to that later. So let's go to the machine now and let's start creating this project so you can see how this quilt as you go technique works and how I go from the piecing to adding the decorative stitches on each of the fabric strips as I create the project. Now, before I start stitching, I like to lay out my pieces to make sure that they're long enough, that I've got the order I want, and that everything looks good. So that's just what I'm doing here. I've already selected them, but I'm just making sure everything looks okay. It gives you an idea what it's going to look like on the end. At the end, I should say. So put that there. Another green one. That and little guy in the end. Okay, so it's going to look something like that. Okay. Once I've got it set up like that, I take my pieces off. Okay. There's my center starting piece. This is going on the right hand side. I'm going to move those over on the bed of my machine, and these are going on the left side. Okay. So I'm going to put them like this. Okay, so that I know that the one that's going to be right next to the red is going to be this white one. So I'm just going to put those down there for now. You also see that I've got a seam roller here, Violet Craft seam roller. You could iron your pieces as you go. I like to just use the seam roller. It works very well and I don't have to get up and down from my machine. So we're going to start with this piece here. This is my Crumb fabric piece. And I can decide, you know, do I want to see more of this fabric or do I want that totally off and see more of these? However I want, but I'm putting it on an angle, okay? Doesn't matter what angle, but just an angle makes it a little bit more interesting. If you want, you could do them straight across, but I always think things on an angle are more fun. So that's what we're doing. Now I'm going to take my next piece, and by the way, this is right side up, so that's my Crumb fabric in the center, right side up. I'm going to go with my next piece of fabric and line it up roughly along the edge. You can see this isn't cut perfectly straight. That's okay. We're just going to line it up here. And then we're going to just stitch it with approximately a 1/4 inch seam, okay? Now, I'm using the Janome M7 today, and I have it set up for patchwork piecing, actually, and I have my zigzag needle plate in, which seems weird for piecing, but I'll explain why I'm doing that. And I'm using my AD foot, so I want to use the AccuFeed Flex system when I'm doing this. Now, the reason I've got it set up like this is because we're going to be adding decorative stitches, and I don't want to have to keep switching off my needle plate. So I've set it up like this. I can move my pieces under here. We're going to start stitching about here, and I'm going to be moving it over, so probably about there. Gives me about a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I'm not overly fussed if it's a little bit wider, a little bit narrower. I don't want it to be really a 1/2 inch, but you know, something like that. Okay, it should work relatively well. Okay, I'm just going to cut my stitches. There we go. Yeah, that's about a 1/4 inch. That'll work just fine. Then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to use my seam roller. Get that seam down as best I can. We're going to do some stitching on top of this, right? So that'll keep it down too for sure. So now I have my 2 pieces of fabric here that need some decorative stitches. Okay, so decorative stitches means metallic, right? So I have the top stitch needle in. So I'm just going to take out my existing thread. I have a 2 spool thread holder here, which is handy because I already have the metallic sitting there as well. And I'm just going to thread my machine. And because I've already got that top stitch needle in, I do not need to change my needle, so that's also nice. It's enough I have to change my thread, right? I'm keeping the same thread in the bobbin that I had because I'm just stitching on the batting, I should say. So you're not going to see that thread on the back of the project, so I don't need to worry about changing it out. There we go. Get that all in place. Unlock. And now comes the really fun part, and that is choosing a decorative stitch to put on not only the red piece but the white as well. So I can choose whatever I want. Let's go into decorative stitches here. And the one thing I need to do on this particular machine is make sure that my dual feed setting is in place so I can use that AccuFeed Flex system. And then this gives me the ability to choose any stitch I want to use. So I am going to go in here. We're going to keep it simple to start, fairly simple. I get caught up in all these different stitches because there's so many of them, they're so fun. what I'm doing is I am choosing Decorative Stitch 39. It's kind of just a wavy one with the leaf, and I'm going to put that on the red. So you can see as I choose my stitch that my needle has popped over to the right. It's going to stitch from the right back and forth across. Gives me a bit of an idea of where I should start my stitches here, roughly, keeping in mind that I'm going to lose a 1/4 inch on this side. So we are going to start about there, thereabouts. See if I can get my little tail is caught up in there somewhere. Maybe I can get them out later. Okay. All right, so here's what I've got. Oh, I think that silver looks really pretty on the red fabric. And I will trim this off later, this extra bit there. But that's looking pretty nice. You can see on the back, doing a nice job there. So I'm just going up. You can stop within a 1/4 inch because you're going to lose that eventually. Or you can keep going, up to you. Now we need to put something on the white. Now I know I'm not going to see the silver as much on the white. That's okay. Okay, it's going to show up more in some areas, not as much in others, and that's perfectly fine. Let's do something like this. Okay, now I'm choosing Decorative Stitch D75. Okay, and this is starting kind of in the middle and going to work its way to either side. This is a little bit more of an intricate design than what we had before. Let's try this. All right, so here we have this design. Ooh, that's pretty. Looks nice. Great. One thing I didn't mention is that when I'm doing this, I just have the batting behind. I do not have stabilizer behind. If I was going to use some really dense stitches, I'd probably put a tearaway stabilizer behind this so that it gives more support. Because even here I'm seeing a little bit of tunneling. It'll be okay, it's not that bad. But if I had a dense stitch, it would get much worse. So you might need to put stabilizer behind your batting if you are using dense stitches. All right, so at this point in time, it is now time to add another piece of fabric. How exciting. So we want to add this piece of fabric. Now, I do not want to do my piecing with my metallic thread, okay? I probably could, but I don't want to. So out comes the metallic thread, and in comes my regular piecing thread again. Okay, I like how easy this machine is to thread because it definitely saves me time when I'm doing something like this where I'm going back and forth, right? Oops, a daisy. Get in there. There we go. Alrighty. Now I'm ready to add this green piece on. I'm just going to lay this along here. And again, we're going back into the piecing area, patchwork piecing area. Alrighty. And here we go. Alrighty, here's my green piece on there. Get that all down. And then, of course, I have to add something to it. So back to the metallic thread. Okay, this becomes kind of, well, I was going to say frustrating. That's not true. It becomes kind of a habit, right? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And like I said, if you want to use the same thread for your decorative stitches as you did for piecing, you can save yourself this extra step. But it is kind of pretty, right? And since these are kind of Christmassy colors, having that extra bit of bling is kind of nice too. I'm going to go into a quilt stitch. This is Q8, which is really a serpentine type of stitch. And I'm going to move things over a little bit here because this is a thin piece of fabric. I will lose a 1/4 inch here, so I know this is going to move from side to side. So I'm moving myself over a little bit so I don't lose that stitch. Yeah. Okay, so there we've got that little stitch along. So I could have moved it over a little bit more that way, but I'm not worried. I'm going to lose a little bit of it there. So that's okay. Now, my next thing to do is to put on another piece of this Crumb fabric. So we're going to line that up, and we need to switch our thread. Yes, we do. All right, now this one's really going to stick up on me because of all the seams in there, all the different fabrics in there, but we'll get it down as best we can there. And again, like I said, when you're doing this, when you put the decorative stitches on, that's going to keep it right down for you. So that's good. This is a decorative stitch D36, some little flowers going along here. And it's going to start, looks like, in the center here. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so we have that little line of kind of like a little daisy chain, right? That's really cute. We have one more fabric to put on the edge here, which is this green. So I'm going to do that. So I think you can see how we're going along here. So I would just continue doing that. When I come to the opposite side, what I like to do is I like to switch it around to keep it going on the same angle I did before. You don't have to do that. That's just me. But when I do this, it sounds weird, but I will then switch back around again to add my stitches so that they're all going to kind of go in the same direction, should there be a direction to the stitch I use. So I'll show you that when I get to that side, just so you can see what I mean about changing it around for the decorative stitches. Okay, so I've got this side finished. I do have to add a decorative stitch here on the green, but I wanted to show you how I do this on the opposite side. So I'm going to spin it around. I'm going to put my fabric, make sure I've got the right side. Hard to tell on this fabric. I think this is the right side down. Along here, we're going to attach this with that 1/4 inch seam. All right, so there we go. I'm going to get that pressed down there, and at this point in time I want to add a decorative stitch to it, but as I mentioned before, I'm going to go back again so it is going to be facing in the same direction. Now most of these are not, there's not a certain direction in them. However, if I put in something that does have a direction, so for example if I go into, let me just see where I can find one of these that has a direction. Okay, let's see this little, there's a boot one here. So this is under the pictographs. This is P9. So you'll see what it looks like once we get stitching it. All right, so this one is this little boot. Now, on my machine, I can flip things around, so I could keep going the same direction, but I'm kind of used to going in this angle. It might be just me, but I want to keep going on the same angle. And I'm going to line up my foot like this, because it's starting from the left-hand side and moving towards the right. And then if there were any other directional stitches, they would all be going in the same direction. Again, I might be overthinking it a bit. I've been known to overthink things, but just a little bit of tip if you're sort of like me that way. All right, so there we've got the little boots. They're all facing kind of this way. Again, I could have flipped them myself on the sewing machine, but it just kind of makes sense to me. So I go back and forth. You don't have to, but whatever works for you, do it. So I'm going to finish this off, add the stitches to the other side as well, and show you what the next step is. All right, so I've got them all stitched down, and doesn't look quite very impressive right now because they're not trimmed, okay? So we're gonna have to trim this down to the size of the batting, or 5.5 inch by 7.5. So the batting may have shrunk slightly, so I will make sure that it is the appropriate size when I go to trim it down. And then you're going to have bits and pieces of fabric left over that are probably good for crumb fabric for the next project, right? So let me go and trim this down, and I'll show you what the next step is. So now I have to finish off this mug rug, right? So that means putting a backing on it. Remember, we had this cut before. So I'm going to take my backing and put it right sides together with my stitched little mug rug, matching up the corners best we can there. And then what I want to do is I want to back stitch and stitch all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam, stopping and leaving about a 2 to 3 inch gap here and locking my stitches again. We're going to turn it right side out and finish it off. So let's get this 1/4 inch stitching done first. And I like to start around the long side because it gives me more opportunity to leave that opening. And I'm just going to, I'm actually going to lock my stitches. That should work okay. All right. A little bit further. All right, so I've got this all stitched on here. Now I kept the same foot on I was using before. I could have switched to a 1/4 inch foot. I may do that next actually, but it works out fine. In any case, I just want to make sure I haven't missed, I've caught it all the way around. Looks good. So now I'm just going to clip off my corners here to reduce some of that bulk before I turn it right side out. Just be careful you don't clip through your stitches there. All right, and then I get to turn it right side out. So I like to reach into my furthest corner here and grab it, pull it out, trying not to be too tough on it. There's kind of a bit of bulk in there, right, with all those stitches and our batting, of course. All right. I know it looks like a bit of a crumpled up mess right now, but don't worry, it'll be okay in the end. And once I've got it out there, I like to just kind of finger press or finger point, finger poke the corners initially, just to get them out there. And at this point in time, it's not a bad idea to do some pressing, but first I'm going to use that purple thing. You can use whatever works for you, just to kind of push those corners out a little bit more, trying to be gentle and not poking through the fabric. This guy's kind of stuck in there a little bit. We'll work on him for a little bit more. And the final corner down here. All right. So then at this point I would probably press it, try to press it so that the backing goes to the back where it belongs. Kind of rolls it to the back. And then I have this opening that I have to stitch closed, right? So I need to fold in my front and my back. And once I've got that the way I like it, I will give it a little press to keep it down too before I do some final stitching to keep this all together and close that gap. So I'm going to go do that now. I'm going to press it and then I'm going to come back and show you how to do the final stitching on this Quilt As You Go mug rug. So now I've got this all pressed out, and I've closed up the opening there. I'm just holding it with some Wonder Clips for the time being. And now what I want to do is I want to go all the way around the outside to close up that opening and just seal everything up. And I'm going to do that on this machine by using my regular needle plate. Again, I'm on the Janome M7, but I've put the HP 2-foot on. So what it does in this case is it switches it over, and you'll see my needle is now hovering over this hole in the foot. It is going to stitch in there, so that gives me a very narrow seam, which I like, and it's going to top stitch along the edges here. I'm going to start a little bit before that opening, make sure everything's in there okay. My foot down here, and I've adjusted my stitch length to about a 3.0. So I'm just going to go along here and do that edge stitching. Close up my little hole there. And it almost looks like it is a binding almost. Go one more stitch here, I think. Ooh, right on the edge there. All right, so now I'm just coming up to where I started, so I'm going to just go over those stitches and back stitch a bit to lock things in place. All right, so there we have our little mug rug. So we've got all those nice decorative stitches on it, adds a lot of interest to it. I love the variety of fabrics in that Crumb fabric as well. And you can see the back of it here. I'll just need to trim those threads off. And there isn't any quilting in the center here, that is correct, but it's such a small area, I don't think you need to worry about that. It'll be just fine. And now you've used up some of your fabric scraps. You've had a chance to play with decorative stitches, work with metallic thread as well. So a lot of different skills that you got to practice on this one little small mug rug, and you've got something that's perfect for gift giving. Now, if you're wondering what else you can do with decorative stitches, don't worry, I got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.